Our group is set to present what is short story. Let us define short story. It is a brief fictional prose narrative concerned with a single effect conveyed in a single significant episode or scene involving limited number of characters. At the center of every good story is the truth it reveals. Abstract truth is likely to be indigestible in its raw form, but if wrapped in a well-told story, the revelation of truth could be an intellectual or emotional pleasure. A short story is composed of 500 to 15,000 words.
Hi, I'm Joystick Insigna, and I'm here to tell you about the 10 types of short stories. Short stories are basically literature that could be read within a brief span of time. And there are 10 types of short stories. We have anecdote, drabble, fable, fagot, flash fiction, frame story, mini saga, story sequence, sketch story, and lastly, vignette. An anecdote is a type of storytelling about a real person or an incident. This short account of something is interesting as well as amusing. Often, anecdotes are used to illustrate or support a point in an essay, article, or a chapter. Drabble is the second type of short story. The purpose of this type of storytelling is briefness. It is exceptionally short and it only comprises of 100 words. The third type is fable. It features anthropomorphic creatures telling a story with a moral. Most popular among children, and often the moral is revealed at the end. The next type is fagot, with humor form as the most essential part of its storytelling and short length enough to lead a piece with a pun. Fagot is a story pun or a poetic story joke type of short story. The next one, we have flash fiction. Flash fiction is the modern term given to a very short story that is usually under 500 words. The next type, we have frame story. It is also known as a frame tale or a nested narrative. It is a technique of placing a story within a story for the purpose of introducing or setting the stage for a main narrative or a series of short stories. The next type, we have mini saga. If you can tell a story in 50 words exactly, then you can call it a mini saga. It is about saying a lot with a little. The next type, we have story sequence. When a group of short stories work together to form a longer piece, then it is called a story sequence. However, each story functions as a complete short story on its own. It is also called a short story cycle or a composite novel. The next one, we have sketch story. If you come across a description of a character or a location, it can be referred to as a sketch story. This story is shorter than average piece containing little or no plot. The last type we have is vignette. A vignette is a short piece that focuses on a single scene, character, idea, setting, or object. It can be a standalone piece or part of a larger work. And that ends my report. Thank you!
These are the elements of a short story. First, plot and plot structure. Plot is a series of events that occur in a story. Plot structure is a sequence or method that the story is organized and presented to the audience or readers. Second, narrator or narrative voice. This refers to the person telling the story, may it be first-person point of view or third-person point of view. Third, setting. It is where the story takes place. This setting can be backdrop or integral. In analyzing a setting, one should look into the location or place, time, and mood or atmosphere of the story. Fourth, character and characterization. Character is the person in the story, while characterization deals with how the characters in the story are described. Fifth, tone. It is the author's attitude towards the audience, the subject, or the character. The tone can be recognized through the language or word choice that the author uses. Sixth, style. The author's style has to do with his or her vocabulary, imagery, tone, or the feeling of the story. Lastly, seventh, theme. It is the central idea of the story. It must be expressed in the form of a statement.
According to Roman Jeffries, milieu is a term in literature that incorporates a wide variety of aspects in the story. This does not only talk about the whens and the wheres of the story, but it talks about the characters, their emotions and attitude, or any physical objects that makes the readers feel how the author wants them to feel. It is the social context of the story. In the story War by Luigi Pirandello, the ambience of the story felt heavy since it started with the characters grieving about their children going in the army. This was then followed by the description of the setting, what the characters are doing, and their conversations. Except from directly stating the details of when and where it happened, the way Luigi wrote the story helps set the mood in which the readers can easily visualize, which adds to the factor of relatability. In a shorter and easier description, the way the story is felt or the ambience of the story is what we call the milieu.
Hi, I'm Sheena, and today let's discuss about character and characterization in the short story War by Luigi Pirandello.
The main characters are the old couple, the bulky wife and thin husband, and the fat traveler. The wife was described as a bulky woman in deep mourning, almost like a shapeless bundle. And she is in deep sorrow because her only son was about to stand in the front line of the war. The husband was described as a tiny man, thin and weakly, and he is also in great sadness because of his son. The fat traveler was described as a red-faced man with bloodshot eyes of the palest gray. He avoids dealing with his grief by intellectualizing over the death of his son. None of the characters are named because the author portrayed them as a universal character. All are worried parents for their children. The fat traveler is a dynamic character because there is development in his character, from a fat man to old man. Lastly, the protagonists are all the worried parents, and the antagonist is the war.
War by Luigi Pirandello is set in a train carriage in Italy during World War I. The mood is mostly miserable where the parents are talking about their sons leaving home for war to serve their country. This type of setting is integral because it influences the theme, characters, and actions of the story.
Another plot of the story, War by Louigi is the resolution and the type of ending of the story. I consider the type of the story a tragic one because this story is like World War II. Because many people were mourning their loss of their sons or mourning their departure. They had real problems. Some lost their jobs, some lost their houses and their belongings, and the conditions were terrible. Next, the plot devices. Pirandello uses a well-established literary device to tell his story. He contrives a restricted setting for his characters and lets them share their thoughts with one another. Such constraints, Pirandello even honors the three classical units of time, place, and action. More dramatically, reveals a world in which all progress and hope of progress has ceased. This atmosphere is as dull, oppressive, and intrusive as yesterday's lifeless beer. Pirandello is trying to represent human experience as realistically and banally as possible and could hardly be considered as symbolist. Nevertheless, the imagery is there. His characters sit in an old-fashioned train in a small railway station in a small Italian province and wait to be taken to an even more remote and backward part of the next is the plot elements. First is the exposition. War by Luigi Pirandello is a short story about a couple whose son has been sent to war. They board to a train to leave Rome, the departure spot of their sons and young men going off to war. This couple, who boards the train last, has their one and only son in war. The wife, especially, is grieving the most. It starts when the mother has been crying as their son has been deployed to the front. Her husband explains that the young man is their only son, but another passenger tells the couple that parents cry have more than one son as well. It is all the worth of having more than one son. Next is the climax. The climax of the war comes at the point that the bulky woman, bundled in her coat, as she weeps that her son has been taken to the front to the fight for the country in the war. Suddenly, turns to the old man and asks him, "Then, is your son really dead?" Then, the falling action. The falling action is when the woman asks the man if his son is not really dead. He contemplates her question, realizes his son is truly dead, and that he will never see him again. He then breaks down and cries. Lastly is the resolution or the denouement. But all his rhetoric is just a wall put up to block his face. His lip quivers and his eyes water. He already knows he's lying to himself. Ironically, he's losing his composure as the wife is finding hers. She gets swept up in the intellectual and noble argument. She comes out of her fog and asks his son is really dead. The shocking tactfulness of the question destroys his fragile equilibrium, revealing his extreme anguish.
The main conflict of this story is on how parents effectively justify their son's act upon entering the war. The main characters of this story are a husband and a wife. The husband is explaining to other passengers in the railway car that her wife is distraught upon knowing that their son will be going into the battle. This story was situated during an Italian war. In the first part of the story, there are these parents whose sons will be sent into the battle. The parents were bothered of the thought of worrying about the life of their sons in front of the war, and the mere reason of letting them enter it. There is this fat man entering the conversation, telling everyone that his son died for the sake of the country, and so his son is a hero. There is this one woman who was amazed by the man's words and realized that it is her fault for not being open-minded and being proud to his son upon entering the war as an hero. The woman had the courage to ask the man if his son is really dead. Then suddenly, the man cried, thinking that his son is no longer with him and they will be together again.
Now for the tone of the short story, its tone is serious and sad. For the narrator have narrated that the parents or the characters in the short story were mourning and sad for their sons had to go to the war. For that time was the World War I, the battle between the Central Powers and the Allied forces. So here is the example line in the War by Luigi Pirandello. Now let's proceed to the narrative voice or the point of view of the short story. So here in the War by Luigi Pirandello, its narrative point of view is in the third person point of view and is omniscient, meaning the narrator can and have a free access to the character's thoughts, feelings, and motivations. So here is the example line in the War by Luigi Pirandello.
Hello everyone! Today I will be discussing to you the style of the story written by Luigi Pirandello entitled War. So as I've read the story, the style of the author and how he delivers or tells the story is conversational. The setting of the story is in the train. Each passenger was sharing their different stories of how they experienced the feeling of loss when their loved ones died in serving for the war. Through the different perspectives of the people inside the train, the feel of the discussion is that the death of the passengers' children is something of which they are not in control. The war is reflected in the dialogue, which is very direct, centered on loss of the children in the war, and little in way of national pride or the element of nationalism. In this small dialogue, the damages and horrors of war are simultaneously revealed and experienced.
The deeper meaning of this story is not just sorrow, loss, and grief, but also it talks about
The love of parents toward their children knows no bound. The parents who lost an only son or those who lost one son and still have one left felt the same sorrow. And to their children who sacrificed their life
and shows their love for the country, considered them as a hero, which is called patriotism.
To conclude, the story is not just about loss, grief, and sorrow, but also it talks about the kinds of love, which is the love of parent and the love for country.